If the Eucharist sounds strange at first, then start where the blood marked life from the curse. Back in Egypt, back at the flame, back where deliverance came through lambs that were slain.
Because Jesus was speaking to hearts that all knew what covenant blood and an altar could do. Temple and manna and lamb without stain. Exodus echoes run through every phrase.
So when John tells the story,
the past still remains.
Exodus moving
beneath every phrase.
This is the language
of worship and scars of God drawing broken humanity close to His heart.
Israel
trembling beneath Pharaoh's hand,
crying for freedom,
buried in sand. And God answered suffering, God made a way through sacrifice carried by trust and obeying.
For hundreds of years
Israel cried,
trapped under Pharaoh,
exhausted inside,
forced into labor,
beaten and worn, burying children and mourning the born. Hebrew mothers lived fearing the night, Hebrew sons disappearing from sight. Every prayer carried sorrow and ache, waiting for God to finally wake. Then out in the wilderness, far from the throne, God called a shepherd named Moses alone. Fire was rising, but wood was unchanged, and from the flames God spoke His name. I have seen every tear they have cried, I have heard the pain they keep trapped inside. Go back to Egypt, tell Pharaoh this, my people were never created for this. So Moses returned to the halls of the king, dust on his sandals, fear underneath, standing before the ruler of gold, speaking the words God told him to hold. Let the people of Israel go. Refused and hardened with pride, so God struck Egypt and shattered its lies. Every plague became judgment and war against every god Egypt worshipped before.
First came the Nile, turned bitter and red, fish floating lifeless and drifting up dead.
Happy
God of the river they praised, stood silent and powerless, watching it fade. Then frogs climbed the streets and covered the floors, pouring through bedrooms and under the doors.
Hackett,
the goddess with frog-covered skin, could not stop the plague overwhelming them.
Gnats rose like dust and filled all the land. Priests stood helpless with dirt in their hands. Even their magic collapsed in defeat. Their gods brought low at the god-king's feet.
Then flies swarmed thick through the air like a wave, covering Egypt with rot and decay. Yet Goshen stood untouched through the storm.
sick in the fields where they stood. Sacred bulls falling where cattle once moved. Apis and Hathor could not defend the creatures Egypt had worshipped as friends.
Then swords broke open on skin and on hands. Pain moved like fire through Egypt's whole land. Priest fell trembling, collapsing in grief. Sekhmet, goddess of healing, brought no relief.
Thunder and hail crashed fire from the sky.
Nukes stretched above them but gave no reply.
Shoot, Lord of the air,
Could not hold back the flame while Egypt watched ruin fall down in his name.
Then locusts descended like judgment unleashed, swallowing every green thing within reach. Neper, guardian of harvest and grain, watched Egypt's fields vanish to dust in the plague.
Then darkness covered the nation for days, thick as a burial cloth over their faces. Ra, god of the sun, brought no dawn to the land. The heavens stayed silent beneath God's command.
Still Pharaoh refused after warning on warning.
Still he stood hiding, though Egypt was mourning.
And then came the message that silenced the land.
Death would pass through by God's command.
mark your doorway, stay inside.
Trust the blood to be your sign.
But the blood was only where healing began.
God gave another command to the land.
Leave the land before first light,
Because salvation comes through sacrifice. Passover carried both mercy and meal, God giving people a covenant seal. The blood marked the houses, the lamb filled the room. Israel waited while judgment moved through. And somewhere beneath that terrifying night, God was preparing his own sacrifice.
the lamb had to die so the people could live.
Blood on the doorway, mercy was given, but God wanted more than survival from death. He wanted communion, his life in their breath.
So the families gathered,
The sacrifice shed,
eating the offering.
God prepared, the people a lamb while death passed outside.
Never yet knowing the terrible price.
Cause every lamb carried forward a name Israel could not completely explain.
Every sacrifice whispered the same.
One day the lamb would no longer be animal flesh.
God himself would be given instead. Israel fled through the dark of the night, clutching their children and holding them tight. Pharaoh came charging with soldiers behind. God split the sea and delivered them alive.
Walls made of water rose up on both sides.
Israel walked where no path should survive.
And Pharaoh's army was swallowed below.
And finally Israel was free to go. But freedom led out to a wilderness place, miles of desert and hunger and strain. Children grew weak, people cried out, wondering if God would still help them now.
And every morning the ground shimmered white.
Bread lay like dew when they opened their eyes.
Manna from heaven covered the land.
food from the mercy of God's own hand. For centuries Israel waited and prayed for manna from heaven to fall once again,
For another great prophet, for fire and release.
for God to come near and renew everything. Then Christ walks down through waters below, while heaven breaks open and calls him the Son. He teaches from mountains, feeds crowds in the wild, breaks bread in the desert mile after mile. But every old sign kept burning more bright as shadows gave way to the fullness of light. Moses brought manna, a gift from above. Christ brought himself as the bread of God's love.
Moses brought lambs to the altar in fear.
Christ stands before them, the Lamb himself here.
Moses led one nation through waters that night.
Christ walks through death, bringing all into life. And
Now, through the ages, the pilgrim church feeds, still carried by bread through deserts unseen.
Moses gave bread for the desert to eat.
Christ gave himself as the heavenly feast. Inside the temple before God's face, 12 holy loaves were always placed. The bread of presence stood there each day, a sign God dwelled with Israel's faith.
Not common bread for hunger's cry,
But holy bread before God's eyes,
the priest would eat that sacred sign.
a covenant meal where grace would shine.
So when Christ says, I am heaven's bread, the ancient pattern wakes again.
The bread once placed before God's throne now lives in Christ and Christ alone. Bread for the hungry, hope for the weak. God kept feeding the people he freed.
And centuries later, those memories remained alive.
In the hearts hearing Jesus proclaim,
I am the bread that came down from heaven. The crowd stood still at the weight of the sentence, because every Israelite standing nearby knew he was calling himself the divine.
Then Jesus said,
The bread I will give,
for the life of the world is my flesh.
and fear moved fast through the people who heard, shock filling the air at the weight of the words. Because faithful Jews knew blood was forbidden, life belonged only to God who had given it.
How can this man give his flesh to eat?
Oh,
many disciples rose from their seats. Some turned away, some could not stay, hurt by the cost of the words he proclaimed. But Jesus stood firm while watching them leave, still offering love to the ones who withdrew. Because long before Calvary entered the earth,
God had been teaching this pattern first. Now John wrote his gospel in the language of Greek, so the words that he chooses matter when Jesus speaks. Our English says eat, and it looks all the same, but Greek had more texture, more weight in the phrase. At first, John writes phago, a common Greek word, the broad kind of eating most people had heard. The standard Greek wording that people all knew. A simple expression for eating your food.
So if Jesus meant symbols, if the meaning stayed light, this word could have carried that reading just fine. But the crowd grows shaken, offended, distressed, because they hear something heavier inside what he says.
Because Jesus had said, the bread I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. And that sounded too close, too physical, too real, too heavy for people who knew sacred meals. This would be the moment to lighten the claim, to make it feel distant, symbolic and safe. Then Jesus keeps speaking and John makes it plain. The Greek word for eating begins to change. He moves from phago, the broader word there, to trogo, a word with the bite in the air. Trogo means chewing, to gnaw and consume, a physical eating that fills up the room. And this is the detail translation can blur, because English smooths over the force of the words. But John makes the shift where the conflict grows deep, when followers struggle with what Jesus means. Right when the people grew fearful and tense, Jesus kept speaking with stronger offense.
And now Christ stands before them with grief in his eyes, offering his flesh for the world to have life. He said what he said, he let the word stand. Real presence was offered from God's own hand. The Lamb had to die so the people could live. Blood on the doorway, mercy was given. But God wanted more than survival from death. He wanted communion, his life in their breath.
So the families gathered, the sacrifice shared,
eating the offering God prepared.
the people ate lamb while death passed outside,
Never yet knowing the terrible pride.
because every lamb carried forward a name Israel could not completely explain. Every sacrifice whispered the same. One day the lamb would no longer be animal flesh. God himself would be given instead. Then John 6:58 takes it further again, because both Greek words appear near the end. Jesus speaks of the manna their fathers once ate, the bread in the desert God gave them by grace. That manna was real. They ate it to live, bread on the ground that only God could give. And for that manna, John writes phago, the broader Greek word that the listeners would know. Then Jesus speaks of the one who eats him, the one who receives him and lives without end. And there John writes trogo, the meaning turns plain, for eating his flesh, for receiving the lamb. Manna gets phago, Christ receives trogo. The wording grows stronger where symbolism would slow. Then many disciples could bear it no more. Followers who loved him walked out through the door. They said, "This teaching is hard. Who can accept this?" Then they left him standing inside the silence. And Jesus did not chase them to soften the claim. He did not reshape it to ease their pain. He let them walk, he watched them go, because the road he gave them was costly to know. And the question still waits where it waited before. Will you remain or walk through the door?
Because the lamb was never held far from the feast. God gave the sacrifice for his people to eat. From Egypt's first Passover, through manna like rain, the pattern was living before Jesus came.
And when Christ spoke a body of blood and of life, John chose the Greek that still cuts like a knife.
He meant what he said, he let the word stand.
Real presence was offered from God's own hand. 2,000 years later, the question remains:
will you receive him or walk away?
Then skeptics run straight to verse 63. The flesh gains nothing. Case closed, victory. As though one sentence could suddenly erase the words Christ repeated all over the place.
But listen more closely to what Jesus said.
My flesh
fills the chapter again and again.
My flesh for the life of the world to receive.
My flesh is true food for the ones who believe.
Then comes the line they say ends the debate. The flesh gains nothing,
but the wording has changed.
because Christ never says
my flesh gives no breath.
The whole discourse climbs toward life through his death. Because all through the chapter
Christ
speaks in direct terms.
My flesh for the world,
My blood is true drink.
again and again.
He calls it his flesh,
and nobody hearing him
thinks symbol instead. Then verse 63 enters the scene.
the flesh gains nothing.
Now hear what he means.
He does not say
My flesh gives no life. Because moments before this, Christ speaks of his body as bread from the Father,
true food from the sky.
his flesh for the world, so the world stays alive. But here the flesh means human understanding. People still judging through ordinary thinking, trying to measure what heaven has said through human ideas inside of their heads.
So the flesh points instead toward earthbound perception, human limitation,
Fallen reflection,
trying to measure what heaven has said through categories trapped inside natural sense.
And then comes blood. Modern readers miss the force, but ancient Jews would feel it first. Blood was forbidden deep inside Jewish law, not dietary preference,
not a cultural flaw.
Torah guarded blood with care. Life itself was dwelling there.
Blood was sacred, set apart,
Connected to atonement, to altar and heart.
Leviticus taught them the life is the blood.
It declares it plain, the life resides within the veins. Deuteronomy repeats, do not consume the blood you eat. Life belongs to God alone, never handled for fun. Priest poured blood before God in the shrine,
Because blood represented life,
and life was divine. Israel was commanded, do not consume it. Drain it from the animal,
keep yourselves from it.
so generation after generation,
Grew up hearing
blood belongs to God, and consuming it brings defilement and judgment near.
this is the fear, this is the reason.
The crowd recalls here.
So when Christ tells them, drink my blood. The statement strikes the crowd at once, because no faithful Jew would hear those words and brush them off like nothing there.
The Lamb had to die so the people could live. Blood on the doorway, mercy was given. But God wanted more than survival from death. He wanted communion, His life in their breath.
So the families gathered, the sacrifice shared, eating the offering God had prepared. The people ate lamb while death passed outside, never yet knowing the terrible price.
Then comes the Last Supper, the candles burn low. Passover prayers fill the room with their glow. Passover living through all that He says. The Lamb and the promise alive in the bread.
There at the table with bread, wine and flame, Christ speaks through the story Israel knew by name. At Passover lambs were brought to be slain, but death alone did not finish the feast.
The household still gathered, the meal still remained.
The people received what had died in their place. The meal carried memory,
the meal carried name,
the meal carried covenant passed down through the ages. And there at the table Christ finally says, "This is my body,
This is my blood
of the covenant."
Every sacrifice whispered the same. One day the Lamb would no longer be slain. From field or flock for Israel instead, God Himself would be given as bread.
Then Luke and St. Paul record even more. This cup is the new covenant formed in my blood. And suddenly Exodus echoes again, back to the mountain where Israel entered in. This is the blood of the covenant, words first spoken through Moses long ago. So Christ stands there as greater than Moses,
bringing the old covenant into completion.
at Passover inside the meal,
calling Himself the sacrifice revealed.
God's saving ways. The first cup proclaimed, you still are my own. The second recalled how God brought them home. The third cup was filled with redemption through blood. The fourth cup rose up with thanksgiving to God. For hundreds of years through sorrow and flame, Israel kept kept drinking the cups in this way. Then there at the supper Christ reaches for wine, the cup of redemption held up in his hands. And suddenly all of the old story meets the blood and the covenant, the lamb and the feast. Because Jesus takes what is royal new and fills it with meaning more startling and true. The Exodus story, the lamb that was slain, the blood on the doorway, deliverance night. And there at the table, the shadows grow thin, the Passover lamb now speaks from within. And Christ himself becomes the lamb, heaven reaching down to man. The lamb had to die so the people could live. Blood on the doorway, mercy was given, but God wanted more than survival from death. He wanted communion, his life in their breath. So the families gathered, the sacrifice shared, eating the offering God had prepared. The people laid lamb while death passed outside, never yet knowing the terrible price. Every sacrifice whispered the same: one day the lamb would no longer be slain from field or flock for Israel instead. God himself would be given as bread. And later Paul gives the word we need: koinonia, shared life in the feast. The cup that we bless is communion in blood. The bread that we break is communion with God. Koinonia means we share and receive participation in Christ as we eat meal, and altar joined as one, communion with the Holy One. The Eucharist carries temple weight, holy bread, holy blood, holy grace. Holy
Paul wrote to Corinth, the church split in pride, gifted and loud but corrupted inside. They boasted in knowledge and power and speech, while sin sat among them where mercy should teach. A man in their body across sacred lines, and the church looked away while calling it fine. They acted enlightened, mature and set free, but freedom without truth turns rotten quietly. So Paul warned the church, don't you know what this does? One bit of leaven can spread through the blood like yeast in the dough when it rises unseen. Hidden corruption can poison the feast. Before Passover came, Israel cleaned out the bread, removing old leaven before lambs would be bled. No swollen up pride, no old life remained. The house had to change when the lamb had been slain. Then Paul lifts the veil and declares what it means. Christ is our Passover, offered and seen. The lamb has been sacrificed, death has passed by, so I keep the old sin alive in the night. This feast is no place for pretending we're pure, or keeping the sickness we refuse to cure. It calls us to truth, to sincerity's flame, to live like the lamb really died in our place. So cast out the malice, the old bitter yeast. Come clean to the table, come whole to the feast. For mercy was given, but mercy still calls. The lamb died to save us, not leave us in chains at all. I preach this a symbol alone, some empty reminder, some thought on a throne. The Passover lamb was not stared at from far. The people were saved and they ate what was marked. So when Paul says Christ is our Passover slain, he knows that a sacrifice leads to a meal. The lamb on the altar becomes what we take. The death that redeemed us becomes what we receive. Come to the table where covenant stands. The body once broken, now placed in our hands. The lamb who was slain is the feast of the free, not merely remembered but given to eat. For Paul knew the altar, the cup and the bread were not dead little symbols for thoughts in the head. The body once broken, the blood once poured free is the lamb we receive when we fall to our knees.
The lamb had to die so the people could live. Blood on the doorway, mercy was given, but God wanted more than survival from death. He wanted life in their breath. So the families gather, the sacrifice shared, eating the offering God had prepared. The people ate lamb while death passed outside, never yet knowing the terrible cry.
Then Paul turns again to the table they shared, where the rich came full while the poor sat there. They called it the supper, but fractured the room and dressed up their sin in a holy tune. Some ate like kings while the hungry stayed weak. Some drank to excess at the covenant feast. The table of mercy, the meal of the Lord, became one more place where the broken were ignored. So Paul's voice thundered through Corinth that night, this is not the Lord's meal you're eating in pride. You cannot receive what was poured out for all, while shaming the ones Christ came to call. For the cup that we bless is His blood that we share, and the bread that we break is His body laid bare. This is no empty sign, no shadow alone, but communion with Christ from His altar throne. So examine your heart before coming to eat. Do not treat as common what heaven calls feast. For whoever comes careless in guilt and in sin receives holy judgment instead of life within. If you don't discern the body, if you mock what is true, then the meal meant for healing brings judgment on you. That is why some were sick, why some fell asleep when they handled the lamb like cheap bread in the streets.
So come with repentance, come humble, come clean. This table is mercy, but mercy is king. The lamb is not offered for pride to consume. He is fire for the faithful and judgment for fools.
And then comes the historical question. What did the earliest Christians believe? Go back before the Reformation years, before modern low church ideas appeared, before centuries of fracture and debate reshaped the arguments people make. What did the Christians closest to the apostles believe? The earliest witnesses show a consensus. Ignatius of Antioch guarded the claim that Christ in the Eucharist truly remains. He opposed those pushing the view that Christ's Eucharistic flesh was untrue, and confronted those who said the Eucharist carried symbolic meaning instead. Justin Martyr said Christians do not receive it as common bread and common drink, but as Christ incarnate. Irenaeus said the bread becomes the Eucharist, the body of Christ. That is the early Christian baseline, not mere symbol. Real presence, body and blood, gift and sacrifice. These were not scholars, 1,000 years gone, inventing new teachings centuries on. These men stood close to apostolic days, still breathing air near the first generation of faith. And nowhere among them does history show just symbol standing as doctrine alone.
Every sacrifice whisper the same.
One day the lamb would no longer be slain.
From field or flock for Israel instead,
God Himself would be given as bread. So where does the shift finally begin? Where does remembrance replace what had been? Not in Antioch, not ancient Rome, not in the fathers or liturgical songs. The major division rises much later. The Reformation, conflict in theological fracture. Then Zwingli arrives and changes the tone. The feast becoming remembrance alone. Luther stops short
still close to the source, speak of Christ's presence with one united voice.
Because for over 1,000 years straight, the church approached these texts one way,
and history stands there stubborn and plain, where the people find comfort in that restraint.
The Lamb had to die so the people could live. Blood on the doorway, mercy was given.
But God wanted more than escape from the grave.
He wanted communion, his life freely gave.
So the families gathered, the sacrifice shared, eating the offering God had prepared. The people ate lamb while death passed outside,
Never yet knowing the terrible price,
because every lamb
carried a promise concealed,
shadows of mysteries waiting revealed,
and every sacrifice offered in flame
whispered a promise again and again.
one day the Lamb would no longer be slain.
Not beast from the field, but God in our place.
One day the Lamb would stand and be seen,
God giving himself as the covenant feast.
body and blood, the wine and the bread.
God giving himself in the place of the dead. So hear Christ's words still echo tonight.
Take this and eat.
This is my body.
That is why John 6 turns severe. That is why disciples disappear.
That is why
Why go?
turn Strogo there. That is why
The crowd.
stand shocked and stare.
That is why to suffer.
Becomes the sign.
That is why.
Covenant blood fills the wine.
That is why the Father spoke the way they did.
Guarding the teaching the apostles gave them. So no, the Eucharist cannot be reduced to symbols